The Spot Track Podcast, talking sports contracts, the salary cap, and business of sports.
Well, welcome to another edition of the SpotTrack.com podcast. Kevin Sylvester along with Paul Peck and the founder of SpotTrack.com, Mike Giannetti, the place you go for all of the contract information in sports, always updated. Frankly, Mike never sleeps. That's just pretty much what
it's amazing
it is.
I'm here at all.
If there's a practice squad guy who gets signed, Mike is on it, and he'll stay up to all wee hours in the morning to make sure he gets the latest information.
I know more names than I care to know, that's for sure.
When a transaction happens, which they happen every day now in sports, you're like, oh, crap.
No, I love it.
Okay.
I love it. I drink way too much coffee and I spend too much time doing this stuff, but sometimes I see my family.
We hear you. Got a game. Marv Albert had a book about that once. Hey, I'd love to, but I have a game.
That's right.
Yeah, there
so
you go.
Paul and I can relate to that. Well, we want to talk this week about just the business of football and how you try and build a team in today's era of football, because, Paul, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, you drafted a team, you hung on to your players, there was restricted free agency, there was all these rules that really prevented a ton of movement, and there weren't even really trades. But now...
Yeah, the salary cap changed everything in the NFL, and what it changed, Mike, is that the decisions were no longer being made strictly for football reasons. There's always an element: can a guy play? Can he not play? How good is he? How not good is he? But there's somewhere, I don't know that it's quite a 50-50 mix, but there's a percentage of every decision that's made has to be made with the financial part in line.
Yeah, there's no question that it's definitely sliding towards that direction in terms of the majority of how these decisions are made, but and it's not so much business versus football as it is the different ways that you can impact a roster these days, right? So there's obviously a need for fluidity with your roster in terms of the business side of the football. And what we're seeing is every single week, Kevin, you spoke to it, every single day I'm changing something, dozens and dozens of things across these sports. The football roster is changing hourly, right? There's suspensions coming down. There's players,
right.
practice squad
Gronkowski,
players.
right,
Yeah, every single week you're seeing new elements to the roster, and all of that impacts the cap throughout the entire season. So it's not just the offseason, it's not just free agency and trades and things like that. While the season's going on, everything's happening in a fluid motion, and the job of the GM and the front office and them are to assess this, manage this, make sure they're within reason, but also have a plan. And really, that's when you talk about team building, it's not just, what's happening in the offseason for the upcoming season. It's 2-3 years. It's longer than that in some cases. And you've got to be able to manage that with every single move they make.
The interesting thing to me is style of play and how it's gone, because that changes and sometimes can change rapidly where, just 3-4 years ago, running backs weren't worth as much. Now all of a sudden, well, wait a second, running backs are worth more again. Like, when did that change?
And what's interesting to me about that is it's a huge part of how your financial plan is put in place, right? It's how you're going to build your team in terms of passing versus rushing, or pass rush versus run stop. All of that comes into play when you're signing players. Obviously, the coaching system. What's interesting is the coaching stability has become a joke. You're seeing 5-6 coaches a year be fired, and that's detrimental to a front office. When you've got a new system, you've got to obviously hire, then there's a new system to put in place, then you've got to assess the roster in terms of who fits that system, then you get to the business side of it in terms of, well, who can we afford to lose now because we've got to change this and bring this guy in and things like that. So the coaching instability and the turnover in that with systems has got to be damning to these front offices.
I learned a wonderful lesson about this when reading a book written by Hall of Fame executive Bill Polian, who ran the Colts during the Peyton Manning era, and he talked about the fact that he had Peyton Manning and Marvin Harrison and Edgerrin James, and I don't know but maybe 60%, 65% of their salary cap was dedicated to offense, if not even higher than that. And he needed to hire a coach when he hired Tony Dungy, who played a defensive system that was interchangeable, easy to learn. Rookies could adapt to it, step right into play, because he knew there would be constant turnover on defense because they were not going to be able to keep their great players on defense because the money was going to be allocated towards the offense. And frankly, he knew Peyton Manning was good for 31 to 35 points per game. So he just needed a defense good enough to keep his opponents at 24 or 28. But that's why he hired Tony Dungy and the Tampa 2 defense, because it's simple, it's easy, it doesn't require a very specific kind of player, and you could plug a rookie into it and he could play at a decent enough level. But those were all being driven by the money concerns of saying, I need to spend 70% of my cap on my offense because I've got Peyton Manning and all these Hall of Famers.
Well, there's no question that teams still think like that these days, especially with the wide open offenses we're seeing and the need to spend on the wide receiver position and the quarterback position. Obviously, the percentages obviously stay in that direction. And I think to your point, I think you're seeing that with these good defenses. That flexibility is absolutely crucial in terms of how they structure these defenses systematically and financially, because you just can't keep players for 8 years anymore. It's not going to happen. You know what I mean? You get this. You've got a nice rookie system in place where you can manage your cap nicely with young players. But man, every year, about this time of year, we start looking at veterans that are going to be on that bubble come March. And it's a lot of it doesn't have to do with their production. They're still producing fine. They're still great players. But man, those cap numbers get higher and higher every year. And we call them cap casualties. And every year we do a couple of big reports just highlighting these veterans that may have to fall off the wayside because salary caps are obviously hard this year. And it's difficult for teams to keep veterans 7-8 years down the road.
I remember when the cap first came in, and I remember having a conversation with John Butler, who was former Buffalo Bills and San Diego Chargers GM, late John Butler. And we were talking about the salary cap, and I remember him telling me, and I'm not going to do it justice, but I'm going to do a John Butler impersonation anyways, because I admired the man a lot. Kevin, it's not. I'm going to stop now because it's terrible. But anyways, he told me
we can cut that.
I got a little bit of a cold here, and it affects my John Butler impersonation. And Paul's looking at me like, as soon as I said a couple of words, like that's not even close to John Butler how he was. But anyways, he said it's not the top end guys that are going to be difficulty in the cap. It's going to be the mid-level veterans, the guys making $800,000 at the time was, a significant amount of money. He goes, I got all these guys that, are going to be making $800,000 to $1 million. You have 20 or so of those. That's going to kill you on the salary cap. And I think that still holds true. It's a predictive comment from John Butler, and it's the cap casualties. It's the veteran players that you want to keep around, but pay level, they've just gotten to a point where maybe it's that second contract or third contract, and you're like, I can't afford that guy.
Yeah, and you mentioned the running back and how that's changed over the last few years. Obviously, the way we look at it is positions of importance, right? So in the modern era here, obviously the quarterback is dominant and probably will be for the remainder of time, but you've got positions like the wide receivers and tight ends who have just exponentially added dollars to these caps because of their need to the offense, right? The majority of plays are passing
Almost
plays.
every team starts basically has three starting wide receivers
tight ends
now.
Yeah, right? And even running backs are being asked to catch the ball way more now. So their value increases when they can do that. So obviously there's positions of importance where sure, pay them top dollar. The cap is going to handle those kind of players. You want those players on your team, obviously, right? It's that second tier. It's that tier of players who are in veteran contracts. Maybe they got a nice extension 2-3 years ago, and like I said, those cap numbers have risen to a point of question, right? So if they're now, maybe their cap number is in that first tier of rankings in terms of how high it is. And if you don't see that person as an elite player, but their cap number says they're elite, that's where the question comes in.
If their production is only slightly better than what a rookie on a rookie contract can do, that's what makes them, sort of expendable.
So that's the next level, right? There's obviously the money part of it and how high their cap figure is and things like that. But it's timing, right? It's when is this team going to turn it over? We talked about coaching turnover. Obviously, there's turnover on the roster as well. Yeah, the rookie wage scale is so specific that you can essentially say, why do I need an $8 million player when I can have a $800,000 player for 2 years? So you can budget how that's going to work in terms of veterans versus rookies, and that's certainly a way that's we've seen, especially in the quarterback position. I mean, we're seeing 11, 12 quarterbacks out there with a cap figure less than $1 million right now. Obviously injuries have factored into a lot of that, but you're seeing teams like Houston and some teams around the league that if they can hit gold with the rookie quarterback or the rookie wide receiver or the running back, if they can do that it sets their cap up to build elsewhere for 4 years.
Yeah, and the quarterback thing is where it all starts.
Yeah.
I think back to the when the Seahawks were on Russell Wilson's rookie contract, and they were super good, and they won a Super Bowl. It allowed them to keep all those defensive players. It allowed them to keep the Legion of Boom, Doom. What are they? Legion of Doom or Legion of Boom?
I think Legion of Boom.
It would allow them to keep them together because they were not paying their quarterback $15 to $18 to $20 million a year. Well, then now all of a sudden Russell Wilson gets to the point where he needs that contract, and now all of a sudden they have to make harder decisions as to where they're going to spend the money. So if you can get a quarterback on a rookie deal and have a pretty good team around him, it gives you so much flexibility to build a winning team.
And it's interesting specifically this offseason, right? Because you've got at least 12 teams that need a quarterback next year, arguably. Maybe more, maybe less, but 12 seems to be the number based on the research we've done. Which way are they going to go? Because there's going to be free agents available. There's going to be Sam Bradfords. There's going to be possibly Tyrod Taylor, maybe even Alex Smith as free agent quarterbacks available. Are you going to pay $18 million for a free agent quarterback? Or are you going to go draft a first-round quarterback where you're paying $6 million for 4 years?
Well, it probably depends on draft position of those teams, and maybe those players don't get signed until after the draft, till those teams see if they can get the quarterback they want in the draft.
It's going to be interesting for me because it'll be a learning process, right? Because this will be the first offseason where there's legitimately going to be starting quarterbacks available in March in terms of free agency.
Which almost never happens.
Right? I mean, you had Peyton Manning, which was an anomaly. We thought we had Tony Romo for a little bit there. That was pretty fun for a couple months last year. But you might have Kirk Cousins, Sam Bradford, Tyrod Taylor, Alex Smith. Legitimate
Drew
starting
Brees
quarterbacks.
is a free agent, whether he'll ever become one, right?
Yeah, I think that's going to stick in New Orleans. But legitimate starting quarterbacks could be available. And generally, what happens in free agency is you overpay. I mean, that's almost always the case with every sport. You overpay for free agents. So unless they wait, like you're saying, we could see some ridiculous numbers coming for quarterback signings. But the question, it begs the question again, is it the right way to go? Kirk Cousins is 30 years old. Tyrod Taylor is 30 plus years old. Do you want to pay $25 million a year for a free agent quarterback when you could do arguably as good, if not better? I mean, there's a reason they're a free agent, right?
Sure.
That's true.
There's a reason a team would let them go. Kevin brought up another interesting point. We talk about running backs as being one of those positions that's become devalued, partly because there's so many of them.
Well, it was, but now it's valued again.
I know, but I wonder if wide receiver is heading in that direction because so many colleges run the spread. So many colleges have run 6 wide receivers out there all the time. There's going to be more guys available to the NFL. You wonder if the contracts and the length of teams' commitments to wide receivers will become shorter, much like they did with running backs.
I heard a great discussion on the way over here today, and it was about the Los Angeles Rams and how they're sort of changing football a little bit, right? I mean, they obviously drafted that quarterback, and it seems to be working out. A year and a half into it,
they gave up to get their guy
for sure. Yeah, I mean, and obviously that drafting a first-round quarterback seems to be the way to go in terms of winning the lottery and having a cheap quarterback for at least 5 years. But they also structured a wide receiver core. I mean, really, they just, brought over the Buffalo Bills and said, let's come play in Los Angeles.
Robert Woods and Watkins.
But they already had Tavon Austin, who is on a ridiculous extension. They drafted 2 players who actually are playing for them this year. So they've got an arsenal, right? They've got football players at the wide receiver role across the board, and they're all contributing. And to your point, I think this might be a way to go. None of those players makes top dollar, not even close. I mean, Tavon Austin makes like $11 a year, which is second tier in terms of wide receiver. Mm-hmm. He's probably out the door this spring anyway. But what they've done is they've brought in depth instead of elite, right?
Yeah.
They brought in guys of value, paid them a little more than they probably should have, which is why they were able to get them. But they're able to build a full arsenal of players to handle injury, to handle different scenarios, to handle the spread options. So they're definitely a team to watch in terms of how the wide receiver position was built, because I think more teams may look to that.
Well, isn't that the Patriot way? And how to do it?
It is. But the Patriots have done it with turnover, which it has been unbelievable. It's underrated how much they've turned over that wide receiving core in the last 10 years, 15 years. And have still been able to make this work. It's a testament to the system and stability, of course, which we talked about. It's certainly feels like Los Angeles is going in that route, and we'll see what happens with this offseason. Obviously, Sammy Watkins will need a new contract,
and that's another
like
point. That class of wide receivers, Beckham, Evans, Watkins, they're starting to become free agents, and we'll get our answer about whether the position's been devalued or not based on how much those guys get.
I'm actually looking before that. That's a very interesting class, but I'm looking at the Des Bryant class. I'm looking at Demaryius Thomas and Des Bryant and Julio Jones, who have all been paid, all have their extensions. And I'm not sure those teams are very happy that they have those situations on their hand right now, because I'm not sure that they're getting, we talked about value for dollar. I'm not sure they're getting even close to it. Obviously, certainly not in Des Bryant's case. He's fallen out of favor in terms of a consistent offensive weapon in Dallas. And, the cap figures are rising for him as well. Obviously, Julio Jones, had a terrible start to this year in terms of production. Demaryius Thomas doesn't have a quarterback. It's tough to blame him. But, again, these are top dollar, players, not just wide receivers in the league. I mean, these are massive caps, and it's tough to value those players. So, like I said, the Rams, the Patriots are a good example as well. Maybe those are systems that we need to look for in the next 18 months in terms of structuring the wide receivers with more depth.
As far as building a team, a quarterback is number one with that, and so everything starts and ends with a quarterback. And I think you can find running backs. I really do. I think you can find competent running backs.
It's such a short lifespan position, too. That's why no one wants to make those big money commitments, because you reach a certain age or number of carries is even more important. You tend to fall off.
Well, it's a passing game, so why am I going to invest in somebody that I have to run the football with? You do need to run, but you can set up the run with a pass. So my quarterback will be number one. I want to protect that asset, right?
Right.
So he can throw the football. So offensive line, I would concentrate on next. I have to have at least one elite guy for him to throw to, because that attention will make the others better. Look at Gronkowski with the Patriots, and let's the other little guys run all over the place. And then I have to defend that.
You have to negate the asset.
I have to negate that, right? So I want one top cornerback and probably a safe
pass rusher.
Well, and a pass rusher. So there's 3 players on defense that you have to invest in, 4 players on offense at least that you have to invest. That's 7 players out of 53 that you're going to have to pay big money to.
Do the numbers back that up, Mike?
They do. They definitely do. I mean, you're hitting all the points there. I'd say that offensive line is a little too generic. I think
tackle. Tackles.
I mean, the centers and the guards have increased their pay, which is I think is a good thing. I think guards need to be paid more. I really do, and I think that's coming. I think you've seen that a little bit last year in free agency. But tackles obviously need to be paid top dollar. I think the cornerback market surprises me a little bit, because I think the cornerback position is a position that could have more depth. I think cornerbacks should translate to the wide receiver in terms of how
if there's more receivers
built.
being played in college, then there's going to be more cornerbacks.
So I could see, especially because they're just raw athletes, right? I mean, I feel like, and teams have done this, converted just true athletes to this position, because it's really just a chase down, and if you're tall, you're dominant. But so the cornerback position, the way that money has gone surprises me a little bit, especially the Josh Norman contract. I mean, that went a little bit crazy. So I could see that maybe leveling off a little bit in the next 2 years. Pass rush will always pay.
Yes.
It's pay the quarterback and pay somebody to get the quarterback.
Right.
To me, that's 1 and 2, 1A, 1B. The wide receiver is extremely interesting. I think Paul made a great point, and I think it's definitely something to watch, especially when we're talking about these cap casualties coming up here. Keep an eye on Des Bryant, keep an eye on Emmanuel Sanders, Randall Cobb, a couple of really big names who've got okay contracts in terms of how they want to be paid probably. But number one, are they going to be able to last out these contracts? And number two, what happens for the next wave? What happens for Sammy Watkins and Jarvis Landry and Brandon Cooks and Mike Evans?
Beckham's going to be interesting because he's coming off the injury year. Yeah. He's a free agent, right? This coming off season.
No, he'll have his 5th-year option available.
One more year. Okay.
Yeah, so these guys can all stick it out one more year if they need to, except for Watkins. Watkins was
because they didn't
declined.
pick the option up.
So
the Bills did not. Yes.
He's going to hit free agency. So
the injury factor on that class too. You mentioned with Beckham, but Sammy Watkins. I mean, the injury's got to be a factor. Had some injuries this year, and it hasn't been unbelievable for the Rams.
So one thing we look at when we talk about the positions of importance is the risk of that position in terms of injury. So, we track the injury reserves every year, and we've got some data that sort of backs up, positionally who tends to get injured more. And this has to start coming into play when you're signing these contracts because it should lead to more depth at that position, right? Which should lower the top dollar for that position. You've seen that with wide receiver. We've seen a ton of wide receivers go down this year. We've seen a lot of secondary players go down, especially look at that Seattle defense. I mean, they're decimated in the secondary. That's probably arguably the best secondary in the league for the last couple of years.
Isn't Sherman scheduled to be a free agent too?
Sherman is not, but Sherman is going to make our cap casualty list this year because of the way that
they were thinking of getting rid of him last year.
Well, they tried to trade him. Well, he made it known that they were trying to trade him. I'm not sure they ever actually tried to trade him, but he's going to hit that list this year just because those guys are getting a little older. That defense is worth a ton of money, and we talked about how Seattle needs to pay. I mean, they've got no offensive line. That's
exactly what I was thinking. Their offensive line's a disaster. That money has got to be funneled across the line of scrimmage.
I don't know how they've been wrong for 6 straight years, but they've been wrong for 6 straight years. It's a good thing they've got an anomaly of a quarterback who can make defensive ends look like they aren't even moving. But yeah, they're going to have to obviously address the offensive side of the ball this year in terms of their money, and I think Sherman's a cap casualty in terms of that. But looking at positions and how often those players get injured is going to affect the bottom line of how much these guys can make, I think, going forward. I think you're going to start to see GMs be smarter with this in terms of dealing with negotiations because you can't pay a guy like Odell Beckham Jr. $18 million a year if he's only going to play 4 games.
Right.
And that's where we're going. Look at that Monday night game last night. We had hits all over the place. And they were in retaliation to Antonio Brown getting hit last postseason.
Yeah.
A now $17 million per year player. So if Pittsburgh thinks they can lose a $17 million per year player to injury and win football and have a strong salary cap, they're crazy.
What positions? Maybe you don't have the information. What positions are the most injury prone, and which are the least? Have you figured out that information yet?
So obviously the trenches are where the majority of the injuries happen in terms of offensive and defensive lines. But from there, we're starting to see the secondaries really build up. I mean, the defensive backs they've got nothing going for them. Penalties are against them. The passing game is obviously against them, and really the injuries have piled up because of it. I don't know if it's timid play, if they can't be as aggressive as they want to be because of these fines and suspensions and all these things that kind of circle the defensive side of the ball. But the secondary, I think, is an increasing position in terms of injuries, and believe it or not, the quarterback position is still an injury-prone position. They've done everything they can do to protect it. These guys are making the money. We're paying offensive linemen a ton more money. I think the league has done everything they can to protect these guys in terms of the rules of the game. But they're vulnerable. They're always going to be vulnerable, and you've seen it with a lot of big names this year.
One other thing I want to touch on, and SpotTrack.com has every team's cap situation. You can look at your team. Go there and look at how many players are currently under contract, the projected cap space, draft picks available because you have to save space for draft picks to get that cheap labor. Just like business, corporate America. But the process, right? That's a term that's used in a lot of teams, used in Buffalo. Trust the process. Do we even know what the process is? I'm not saying for a specific team.
It may not be the same for each team.
Well, no. I'm just saying, because the process seems to change, and I think part of the process is you're always figuring out how much can I cut financially in order to build a team.
Yeah, I think the fluidity is the consistent process across the league. Understanding that no one person is safe. Structuring your contracts so that it's never 4 or 5 years down the road. We've talked about a couple of contracts that are really just so heavy for future caps that you can't get out of it. And that's, I think, what teams are trying to avoid in terms of their process, their short-term, their long-term goals. It's always keep yourself available, right? Keep players tradable, keep players cuttable, keep them happy too. I mean, that's obviously part of it here. But yeah, fluidity is the term with the NFL because of the hard cap. You've got to be able to flex really all positions with the exception of maybe your quarterback position for a couple of years. But
that's what I was going to say to you. Is there a position other than quarterback where teams are going to stop throwing big money out? Because like you said, an Odell Beckham, who's such a key to what the Giants wanted to do, he's going to make big money, and then he goes and gets hurt, and then now all of a sudden you can't replace him either roster-wise or financial-wise, and it completely affects your whole season. I mean, is the big money going to start to dry up at some spots?
Long snapper.
Those guys are happy, trust me.
Those guys are valuable too in their own little way.
I can sit here and say the wide receivers shouldn't make as much as they make, but they dominate the game. I mean, they're the most important part of the TV show, right?
True.
I mean, let's be honest here. I mean, they're the ones scoring the touchdowns. They're the ones making the great catches. They're on the highlight reels on YouTube. So, they certainly bring value to the game in terms of the viewership and scoring and production and things like that. As long as the cap keeps rising, these players will continue to make more money. Should it level off? Probably, because depth should be important. I mean, the team itself and the league itself are worse off when great players get injured, right? And great players get injured because they're overused. They're, obviously flukes happen, but there are ways to mitigate these injuries that have happened at such an alarming rate this year, and I'm interested to see how this ends up in terms of numbers this year versus the last couple of years. But in terms of important players, it's not been good in 2017 for the NFL. So there's certainly ways to mitigate that. And one way is for GMs to start saying, I can't pay you 16% of the salary cap anymore because losing you would devastate our team. And we can't do that in terms of financial and a football, standpoint. So, GMs are getting smarter with this. Obviously, teams are getting smarter with this. Where it needs to happen is there needs to be a fluid divide between the football side of it and the business side of it. And I think we're seeing that with most teams. Some are a little farther behind.
Today's Cap Fact.
All right, it's time for our cap fact of the week, and it pertains to baseball, Mike, and a bidding war that's emerging on the next great Japanese baseball player to come over to the MLB from the Japanese Baseball League, and everybody's falling all over themselves here to try to make this deal get done.
Yeah, so the free agent market hasn't really kicked in yet, but there's certainly been some interesting discussions around Shohei Ohtani from Japan, which
I have in my fantasy league.
Yeah.
You might want to.
You jumped on him early, huh?
Early.
Yeah. So really I just wanted to take a quick moment and just kind of understand the structure because it has changed in terms of these international signings over the past year. So step one with how a posting happens, right? The Japan League says, we're ready to, this player is ready to play in Major League Baseball. So obviously there's some factors in terms of age and things like that come across to baseball in terms of how he can be signed. But for the most part, it's pretty cut and dry. They post him for a fee. They essentially shop him to Major League Baseball teams, and they can set that fee up to a maximum of $20 million, which for Ohtani, that's exactly what his posting fee is. There's only been one other player with $20 million under these new rules, and that was Masahiro Tanaka with the Yankees. So obviously this will be a massive signing when it happens in terms of the posting fee.
So wait. When you say posting fee, that means if I'm interested in signing Ohtani,
yep,
I have to pay his Japanese team $20 million.
It's like a negotiating right.
Just to negotiate with him.
Just to negotiate. Well, you will be the winning bid. If you're the winning bid, if he accepts a contract with your team, that team pays Japan $20 million.
Gotcha.
So
I don't have to pay. Not every team's got to pay to talk to
just
him.
to talk. No.
Okay.
So every team did offer up $20 million though. So every team did say we will negotiate with him. So he has limited that list to 7 teams. So while $20 million is huge, and he won't see that, what he will see is a contract not even close to that, which is interesting. So this is how things have changed. Each Major League Baseball team gets an allocated pool for international signings, and it ranges between $4.5 million to $5.5 million based on some compensation that they can accrue during the year. But that's the pool for all international signings they make throughout the entire year. And what that pool alludes to is the signing bonus that's offered to that player. So, plenty of the international signings happen in July and August, and we're kind of at the last point here with Ohtani. So most of these teams have maxed out their international signing cap in terms of what they're able to offer him as a signing bonus. The few teams that do have space, and they're the teams that he has agreed to negotiate with, are the Texas Rangers at $3.5 million and the Seattle Mariners at $1.5 million, both of who are, I think, are favorites to get him in terms of signing a contract, but there's certainly other teams involved. So this is how it works. Let's say the Texas Rangers win the negotiating bid. He agrees to sign a contract with the Texas Rangers. He'll get a $3.5 million signing bonus, and he'll get a minimum salary for 2018, which is $545,000.
Wow.
So you've got a player who is being called the Babe Ruth of Japan. He can pitch and he can hit. He's worth arguably $200 million is what I've heard a lot of these experts say in terms of valuing him from his stats over there. and he's going to make $545,000 to play for the Texas Rangers, by example this year.
But that's in a 1-year deal.
That's a 1-year deal. So what happens in terms of going forward is he comes over with 0 years experience. So he'll have to accrue 6 years of pre-arbitration and arbitration in order to become eligible for free agency. Here's what's going to happen, though. And, obviously this isn't a definite, but here's what's going to happen. He's going to sign that minimum deal this year. He'll get a nice signing bonus to go with it. Not a great signing bonus, but a decent signing bonus to go with it. That team will then attempt to sign him to a long-term extension next season, right? So they're going to buy out the rest of this 6 years of experience in his rookie arbitration system, buy him into free agency. They're going to let him choose if he wants to go to arbitration, if he can make more money there. So if, let's say he's killing it for 3 years, he'll probably make more money going to arbitration and letting those guys decide a price rather than keep on his whatever this extension was now, 3 years later. So they're going to give him options to make more throughout the extension. They're going to pay him a ton of incentives. They're going to give him suites. They're going to give him perks. They're going to give him, marketing deals and all that stuff.
Bobblehead night, sure.
All that, yeah. So they're going to do everything they can to pay this guy as much money as possible. But for this year alone, he will make the minimum.
Now, and that's the other interesting thing is if he chooses not to sign with the Rangers, because I know there's been some indication he would prefer to play on the West Coast. So when you look at the Dodgers, Giants, Padres, and Angels, their international player pool is all under $1 million, right? Mm-hmm. So if he chooses to really want to go to San Francisco, he's going to leave a lot of money on the table.
He's going to make $300,000 as a signing bonus and $545,000. So he'll make less than $1 million for the majority of those teams. And I have heard the Padres as a sleeper team for this player. So, if you can get a guy like that on a 1-year deal for $800,000, I think everybody's going to sign up for that.
The international pool. So, are we talking any players from other countries, or they had played in other professional leagues from other countries? Is that what it's about? Because there's plenty of baseball players that aren't American, North American, right?
Right. Most of those are subject to the draft. So
gotcha.
It's the professional leagues in other countries who have not yet worked to deal with Major League Baseball to handle a draft situation.
It's like a player defects from Cuba, right?
Cuba, Dominican Republic, Venezuela, Mexico. Those are the teams we're dealing with in terms of these international signings.
And that's only about signing bonuses.
That's right.
Pool,
so this recent CBA structured this pool to minimize the Dodgers and the Red Sox and those big market teams from going out and signing these guys for massive money, knowing they can and other teams can't. So that's why we're at this point. This is sort of like a wage scale for international players.
And this is only because he's under contract with the Japanese Baseball League, and the Major League Baseball doesn't want to. They have an agreement not to poach players unless they're sold to them. Essentially,
that's right.
It's not poaching when you're writing
nice
when the team that's losing him gets $20 million out of the deal.
Look at this is how professional soccer happens in Europe every single day.
That's right.
Teams make hundreds and hundreds of $1 million just to let other teams play. Take their player, and this is on a global sense. This is common. So Major League Baseball has brought this in to get better players here, obviously, and players want to be here. The thing about Ohtani is, if he waited 2 more years, he would have bypassed. He'd be 25 years old. He would have bypassed that whole pre-arbitration process. He could have made $200 million right out of the gate because of the way that the age structure and all that works. So he certainly wants to be here and come play for $1 million. Because the choice to not play and keep making a ton of money in Japan is obviously on the table for him. So these players want to be here. Major League Baseball has made an easy path for them to get here, and he'll eventually get a ton of money.
Well, we know Japan, they're telling him to go because they're going to lose $20 million if he plays 2 more years.
Yeah, they're happy.
They're going to be okay with it. All right, great stuff this week. Enjoyed the discussion on building a football team. Really interesting stuff here on Major League Baseball. And say it again, Paul. Shohei Ohtani. Rolls off the tongue.
And again, if you're an NFL fan and you want to start looking at who might be an ex-player on your team in the offseason, cap casualties that Mike talked about, we're in December, and if your team's out of the playoff race, your next focus is going to be on what are they going to do about getting better or who isn't going to be here next year. Spottrack.com is the place to go for that.
All right, for Paul, for Mike, I'm Kevin. We'll talk to you next week.